My name is Ryan Walker, and I took the night shift at Black Creek Meat Processing Plant because it paid almost twice as much as my old security job. The factory sat miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by empty fields and thick pine forest. During the day, hundreds of workers filled the building with noise, but after 11 p.m., everyone left except one night guard. Me. Before clocking out on my first night, the supervisor handed me a radio and a heavy ring of keys. He looked exhausted. 3 rules, he said. Never enter freezer 12 after midnight. If you hear pigs squealing after production has stopped, ignore it. Then he hesitated. If you ever see a pig standing on 2 legs, his voice almost disappeared. Don't let it see you. I laughed, expecting him to grin. He didn't. At exactly 11 p.m., the last truck rolled through the front gate. The massive factory became completely silent. The only sounds were the humming refrigeration units, dripping pipes, and the distant vibration of giant cooling fans. I began my first patrol. Everything looked normal. The slaughter floor had already been washed down. The conveyor belts were motionless. Hooks hung from the ceiling like rows of metal claws. The air smelled of bleach, cold steel, and raw meat. Around midnight, I finished checking every entrance. Nothing unusual. At 12:13 a.m., every light inside the slaughter room suddenly turned on by itself. I froze. According to the schedule, that entire section had been disconnected for the night. A second later, I heard it. A pig squealing. Not one. Several. Loud. Panicked. Exactly like animals waiting to be processed. The sound echoed through the empty building. Production had ended hours ago. Every animal had already been transported. The factory should have been completely empty. I grabbed my flashlight and reached for my radio. Static. Only static. Then, a calm voice whispered through the speaker. Don't go in there. The radio immediately went silent again. I slowly looked toward the slaughter room. The lights were still on. The squealing had stopped. Then something heavy slammed against one of the metal doors from the inside. The metal door shook so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. I instinctively stepped backward. Nobody was supposed to be inside. The slaughter floor had been locked before every worker left. The squealing had completely stopped. Now, there was only silence. I slowly raised my flashlight and aimed it at the small reinforced window in the door. Nothing. Only darkness. The emergency lights inside the room flickered once. For just a fraction of a second, I saw movement. Something large crossed in front of the window. Too large to be a person. I grabbed my radio again. Control, do you copy? Only static answered. Then, a different voice came through. Old. Weak. If you're looking through the window, it's already looking back. The transmission ended. My heart pounded as I leaned closer to the glass. The room looked empty. Blood-stained conveyor belts. Metal hooks hanging from the ceiling. Nothing moving. I let out a nervous breath. Then 2 black eyes slowly appeared from the darkness. They weren't glowing. They were simply watching. I jumped away from the window. The heavy door rattled again. This time something scraped across the metal from the inside. A slow, deliberate scratch, like claws sliding down steel. The sound lasted nearly 10 seconds. Then it stopped. Without thinking, I checked the security cameras on the small monitor hanging in the hallway. Camera 14. Slaughter floor. The room was empty. Camera 15. Conveyor entrance. Empty. Camera 16. Animal holding pens. Empty. Then camera 17 loaded. The image froze for a second. A massive pig stood in the middle of the slaughter floor. It wasn't moving. Its head was lowered. Its front legs touched the ground. I stared at the screen. The image suddenly glitched. When it cleared, the pig was standing upright, balanced on two legs. Its front legs hung beside its body like human arms. It slowly turned its head toward the camera. The picture immediately filled with static. Every monitor in the hallway shut off at the same time. A loud metallic thud echoed behind me. I turned. The slaughter room door was open, just a few inches. I knew. I hadn't opened it. The slaughter room door stood slightly open. I knew for a fact it had been locked. Only two people had keys. The supervisor and me. Very slowly, I stepped closer. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the normal smell of raw meat and disinfectant anymore. It smelled like wet dirt, like something that had crawled out of a swamp. The cold air pouring through the opening felt strange, much colder than the rest of the building. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and pushed the door open another few inches. The hinges groaned loudly. The enormous slaughter floor stretched out in front of me. Rows of steel rails crossed the ceiling. Hundreds of meat hooks hung perfectly still. The conveyor belts were silent. Pools of water reflected the flickering fluorescent lights above. Everything looked abandoned, empty. I slowly stepped inside. My boots echoed across the wet concrete. Every sound bounced around the massive room. One step. Echo. Another step. Echo. The place felt impossibly large now that I was alone. I aimed my flashlight toward the middle of the room. Nothing. Then I noticed something strange on the floor. Fresh muddy footprints. Not boot prints. Hoof prints. They started near the conveyor belt. Then, halfway across the room, they changed. The next prints looked almost human. Long, narrow, 2 feet. As if whatever had been walking there slowly changed the way it moved. I crouched beside one of them. The concrete was still wet. It had been made only minutes earlier. A loud metallic clang exploded somewhere behind me. I spun around. One of the giant meat hooks was swinging by itself. Back and forth. Back and forth. There wasn't enough wind inside the building to move something that heavy. I watched it for several seconds. Then, another hook began swinging. Then another. Within moments, dozens of hooks were moving. None of them touched each other. None of them made sense. They all swung with the exact same rhythm, as if something invisible had just walked between them. My flashlight suddenly flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. When the beam became steady again, I saw it, standing nearly 30 feet away, between two rows of hanging hooks. A pig, huge, far larger than any pig I'd ever seen. Its skin was pale gray. Its body was covered in deep cuts and old stitching. Its head was lowered toward the floor. For several seconds, it didn't move. I slowly reached for my radio. The instant my fingers touched it, the pig slowly lifted its head. Its eyes were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just endless darkness. Then, without making a sound, it stood up, its front legs unfolded like human arms. Its back straightened. Its body rose higher and higher until it was standing perfectly upright, at least 8 feet tall. It remained completely still, just staring at me. Then something happened that terrified me more than anything else. It smiled, not like an animal, like a person trying to remember how humans smile. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, far wider than it should have. Then, in a calm human voice, it quietly said, "You're not supposed to be here." And every hook in the slaughter room stopped swinging at exactly the same moment. The creature smiled. Its mouth stretched far beyond what any living animal should have been capable of. Then it spoke again, in a perfectly calm human voice. "You're not supposed to be here." Every hair on my body stood up. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. The thing tilted its head slowly to one side, exactly the way a curious person would. Then, it took one step toward me. Its hooves struck the concrete with a heavy metallic sound. Clang. Another step. Clang. Its movements looked wrong. It wasn't walking like an animal. It was copying the way humans walked, as if it had watched people for years, but never quite learned how. I finally snapped out of it and turned to run. The moment I reached the doorway, the massive steel door slammed shut on its own. The impact shook the entire room. I grabbed the handle. Locked. I pulled harder. Nothing. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. Complete silence. I slowly turned around. The creature had disappeared. The slaughter floor was empty again. Only the swinging fluorescent lights remained. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real." Then my flashlight landed on one of the hanging meat hooks. Something was dangling from it. A security jacket, exactly like mine. I walked closer. Every step felt heavier than the last. The jacket was covered in dried blood. Attached to the front pocket was a name badge. I reached up with trembling fingers. It read, "Ryan Walker." My heart nearly stopped. Inside the jacket pocket was a folded incident report. The paper looked old, very old. The date at the top read, November 18th, 1998. More than 20 years ago. I unfolded it. Night shift incident report. Employee missing. Name, Ryan Walker. I stared at the page. That couldn't be possible. I wasn't even born in 1998. Someone had written a final note at the bottom. In shaky handwriting. It learned my voice. It learned my face. If you're reading this, run before it starts talking like you. A loud squeal echoed through the slaughter room. Not from a pig, from directly behind me. I slowly lowered the paper. Then I heard it. My own voice. Perfectly identical. Ryan, I found the exit. Hope exploded inside me. Someone else was here. I spun around. Standing near the emergency exit was me. Same face. Same uniform. Same flashlight. The other Ryan smiled and waved. Hurry. It's safe. For 1 second, I almost believed him. Then I noticed something. His boots. They weren't leaving footprints. Instead, every step he took left fresh hoof prints on the wet concrete. He smiled even wider. Then, using my exact voice, he quietly said, "You almost noticed. You almost noticed." The creature wearing my face didn't move. It simply stood there smiling. Its flashlight was still switched on. The beam pointed directly at my feet. I looked down. Fresh hoof prints surrounded me. Not behind the creature. Behind me. As if I had been making them the entire time. "No," I whispered. The fake Ryan laughed softly. It sounded exactly like my laugh. "You've been watching the wrong footprints." My breathing became heavy. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I turned toward the emergency exit on the opposite side of the slaughter floor. The creature didn't chase me. It simply watched, still smiling. I sprinted across the room. The heavy emergency door came into view. Only another 20 feet. 15. 10. I grabbed the push bar. The door flew open. Cold night air hit my face. I stumbled outside into the loading yard. For the first time in nearly an hour, I felt safe. The silence outside was overwhelming. No machinery, no squealing, only wind moving through the trees surrounding the factory. I looked back. The slaughter room door remained open. The fake Ryan was gone. I let out a long breath. Then my radio crackled. "Ryan." It was the supervisor. "Finally. Where are you?" I'm outside." A long pause followed. Then he quietly asked, "What do you mean outside?" "I'm in the loading yard." Another pause. His voice suddenly changed. "Ryan, leave. Drive away. Don't look at the trucks." I slowly turned around. The loading dock stretched across the yard. 7 refrigerated trailers stood perfectly still. Every trailer door was closed. Except one. Trailer number 6. Its rear doors slowly swung open. A cold cloud rolled out into the night. Then, one by one, dozens of pigs walked out, completely silent. None of them made a sound. None of them looked at me. They simply climbed down the ramp. Each one stopped, then slowly stood upright on 2 legs. One, then another, then another. Within seconds, more than 30 pigs stood in the yard. Every one of them over 7 feet tall. Every one facing the factory. Not me. the building, as if they were waiting for something. The supervisor's terrified voice shouted through the radio, "Ryan, get in your truck." Now, I ran toward the parking lot. Halfway there, every creature turned their heads at exactly the same time. Not toward me, toward the factory entrance. The main doors slowly opened. Something much larger walked out. Even the creatures stepped backward. Its head nearly touched the loading dock roof. Its body was hidden in darkness. Only two enormous black eyes reflected the moonlight. The upright pigs lowered their heads, like they were bowing. Then the giant figure looked directly at me, and in a voice that shook the entire yard, it calmly spoke. "You opened the door. You belong to the farm now." I froze. The thing wearing my face smiled wider. "You almost noticed." Its lips never moved naturally. Every word sounded like it had been copied from an old recording. Then, it slowly lifted its flashlight. Instead of shining it at me, it pointed the beam toward the ceiling. I looked up. Every meat hook above us was occupied, not by carcasses, by security uniforms. Dozens of them. Every uniform had a name badge. Every badge read a different name. Every one belonged to a missing night guard. Some uniforms looked decades old. Some looked almost new. One of them was still dripping blood. The fake Ryan laughed softly. They all tried to leave. I backed away. "You aren't real." It nodded. I wasn't. But now I am. Its smile disappeared. "You're becoming me." Suddenly, every light inside the slaughter room went out. Only my flashlight remained. The beam shook violently in my hands. I aimed it toward the creature. Gone. The room was empty again. Then I heard footsteps. Not in front of me. Above me. Heavy footsteps crossed the steel catwalk running across the ceiling. Clang, clang, clang. I pointed my flashlight upward. Nothing. The footsteps stopped directly over my head. A thick liquid landed on my shoulder. I slowly looked down. Dark red. Fresh blood. Another drop hit the floor. Then another. I raised the flashlight again. One of the meat hooks was moving. Very slowly. It descended from the ceiling by itself. Swinging gently. Hanging from it was a massive pig. Its throat had been cut. Its eyes were closed. It looked completely dead. I took a slow step backward. The hook suddenly stopped. The pig's eyes opened. Solid black. Without warning, its front legs grabbed the metal hook. Its body pulled itself upright. Bones cracked loudly. Its spine twisted. Its head rotated almost completely around. The hook continued lowering until its hooves touched the concrete. The chain released by itself. The pig landed on the floor. It stood perfectly still for several seconds. Then, it slowly straightened onto two legs. It was even taller than the first one. Its mouth opened. Instead of squealing, it spoke. In the supervisor's voice, "Freezer 12, you should have stayed away." Then every freezer alarm inside the factory began screaming at once. The emergency lights switched on, bright red. The loudspeaker echoed through the building. "Warning! Freezer 12 door open. Warning! Freezer 12 door open." The creature looked toward the hallway, then back at me. It smiled again. "You don't have to find us anymore. We're coming to you." Somewhere outside the slaughter room, I heard dozens of heavy hoofbeats running through the factory corridors. The alarm screamed so loudly that my ears started ringing. Red emergency lights flooded every corner of the slaughter room, flashing over the wet concrete like pools of blood. The creature never took its eyes off me. It smiled. Then, without warning, it stepped backward into the darkness between the hanging hooks. 1 second it was there. The next, it was gone. Only the sound of heavy hoofbeats echoed somewhere beyond the room. I didn't wait another second. I ran. The slaughter room doors burst open as I threw my shoulder against them. The hallway outside was completely empty. The emergency lights painted everything in deep red. Every freezer door stood shut. Every conveyor belt was still. But the hoofbeats hadn't stopped. They were getting closer, much closer. They weren't coming from one direction anymore. They were everywhere. Behind the walls, above the ceiling, under the floor. It sounded like dozens of animals were running through the factory without making a single mistake. They knew exactly where I was. I sprinted toward the security office. If I could reach the cameras, maybe I could see where they were. The office door slammed behind me. I locked it. One lock, then another, then pushed a heavy filing cabinet against the entrance. Only then did I finally breathe. The security monitors were still on. I switched through the cameras. Loading dock. Empty. Parking lot. Empty. Hallway A. Empty. Freezer corridor. Empty. Then, camera 22. Freezer 12. The image froze for a second before returning. The massive steel freezer door stood wide open. Cold white fog poured into the hallway. Inside the freezer, something enormous stood with its back toward the camera. It wasn't moving. The monitor timestamp read 3:12 a.m. I looked at the clock on my desk. 3:28 a.m. The camera was 16 minutes behind. Then the figure inside freezer 12 slowly turned around. It wasn't a pig. Not exactly. Its body looked stitched together from different animals. Pig legs. Human arms. A massive torso covered in scars. Its head looked almost like a pig's. Until it smiled. Rows of human teeth filled its mouth. The screen exploded into static. Every monitor in the office switched to camera 22. Every single one. The same image. The same creature. Standing inside freezer 12. Then, every screen changed again. Now the creature wasn't inside the freezer anymore. It was standing outside the freezer door. still looking directly into the camera. The timestamp hadn't changed. Still 3:12 a.m. The image changed again. Now it stood halfway down the hallway. Closer. Another change. Now it stood directly outside the security office. I slowly looked toward the office door. Silence. Nothing. The monitors flickered again. The creature was gone. For a moment, I thought the cameras had simply failed. Then, one monitor remained active. Not camera 22. Camera 1. The camera inside the security office. I stared at the screen. The room looked exactly as it should. The desk. The filing cabinet. The monitors. Me. Then, behind me, standing only inches away, was a giant pig-shaped figure smiling directly into camera 1. I spun around instantly. Nothing. The office was empty. I slowly turned back toward the monitor. The creature remained there, standing directly behind me. It slowly raised one finger to where its mouth should have been, as if telling me to stay quiet. Then, very slowly, it leaned forward until its mouth reached my ear. And although nothing stood behind me, I felt warm breath touch the side of my neck. I felt warm breath against my neck. Every muscle in my body locked. I refused to turn around. The monitor still showed the creature standing directly behind me. Its smile slowly widened. Then, the office lights went out. Everything became black. Only the security monitors illuminated the room with a cold blue glow. I reached for my flashlight. It wouldn't turn on. The batteries had been full only minutes earlier. The monitors suddenly changed. Not camera 1 anymore. Now it showed an old security recording. The date appeared in the corner. November 18th, 1998. The exact date from the missing persons report. The footage showed the same office. Same desk. Same monitors. A night guard sat in my chair. He looked terrified. He kept glancing toward the door every few seconds. Then I realized something. The guard looked exactly like the security jacket I'd found earlier. His name badge read, Ryan Walker. He wasn't me. He couldn't be. The recording continued. The old Ryan suddenly looked directly into the camera, almost as if he knew someone would watch this years later. He slowly picked up a marker. On the security monitor in front of him, he wrote one sentence. It copies US. Then the office door behind him slowly opened. Nobody entered. The hallway outside was empty. Ryan stood up carefully. He reached for his flashlight. Exactly as I had done. He stepped toward the doorway. The camera angle never changed. I watched him disappear into the hallway. 30 seconds passed. Nothing happened. Then, he walked back into the office. At least, something that looked like him did. It smiled, sat down in the chair, and calmly stared into the camera. The real Ryan never came back. The recording ended. Every monitor returned to live view. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed the radio one last time. Please, if anyone can hear me, The radio hissed. Then the supervisor answered. His voice sounded panicked. Ryan, listen to me carefully. Do not let it into freezer 12. I frowned. What? I thought it came from freezer 12. No. The supervisor almost shouted. It keeps trying to get inside. My heart stopped. What are you talking about? You've been running away from the wrong thing. A deafening crash echoed through the building. The entire factory shook. Every security monitor switched to camera 22 again. Freezer 12. The giant freezer door stood open. The huge pig-like creature was sprinting toward it on two legs. Not away. Toward it. Then, something inside the freezer moved. The creature instantly stopped. For the first time, it looked afraid. Very slowly, a gigantic hand reached out from the darkness inside freezer 12. It wasn't a hoof. It wasn't human. It was far too large. Long black fingers wrapped around the steel doorway. The pig creature took several steps backward, still staring into the darkness. Then the supervisor whispered over the radio. Ryan, whatever you do, don't let. The transmission suddenly cut off. A new voice replaced it. My own. Perfectly identical. Too late. At that exact moment, something inside freezer 12 opened its eyes. The eyes opened. They weren't black. They weren't glowing. They looked human, cold gray, completely emotionless. The massive hand gripped the freezer door so tightly that the steel began bending inward. The creature standing outside freezer 12 took another step back. Then another. For the first time since I had seen it. It wasn't smiling. It was terrified. A deep sound echoed from inside the freezer. Not a roar. Not a growl. It sounded like an old radio tuning between stations. Thousands of voices whispered at once. Some cried. Some laughed. Some begged for help. Others simply repeated random names. The entire factory lights dimmed. Every freezer alarm stopped. Every machine shut down. The building became completely silent. Then, the giant hand slowly disappeared back into the darkness. The pig creature didn't wait. It turned and sprinted. Not toward me. Away from freezer 12. Its hooves slammed against the concrete floor with unbelievable speed. It crashed through metal doors, shattered windows, destroyed equipment. It just wanted to get away. I stared at camera 22. The freezer remained open. Nothing moved. The supervisor's words repeated in my head. It keeps trying to get inside. That made no sense. Why would something like that be afraid? The radio suddenly came back to life. The supervisor was breathing heavily. Ryan, you finally saw it. What is in freezer 12? A long silence followed. Then he answered, We don't know. We never opened it. I frowned. What? The freezer was already here. Before the factory. Before the town. He continued speaking. When they built Black Creek. They found an underground chamber. There was only one metal door. Mark, he stopped talking. I finished the sentence without thinking. Freezer 12. Yes. They built the factory around it. They believed refrigeration would keep it sealed forever. Another loud impact shook the building. Not from the freezer. From somewhere above us. The roof. Every security monitor switched to the outside cameras. Something impossible was happening. The creatures, all of them, hundreds of pig-like figures surrounded the factory, standing perfectly still, facing the building. None of them tried to enter. None of them moved. They were waiting. Then every one of them slowly looked upward. I followed their gaze. Above the factory, the radio tower lights began blinking, one by one, until every warning light turned solid red. Then, the tallest transmission tower slowly started bending. Not because of wind. Something enormous was climbing it. The cameras couldn't show its whole body. Only pieces. Long black arms. Massive claws. A shape larger than the tower itself. It climbed silently toward the top. The supervisor whispered one final sentence. It found the signal. Then the radio went dead. At exactly 3:33 a.m., every radio inside the factory turned on by itself. A calm voice filled the entire building. This transmission is now live. Then I heard my own voice answer. But I never spoke. The voice laughed. You don't have to anymore. We already recorded you. We already recorded you. Those words echoed through every speaker inside the factory. I felt my stomach drop. The voice wasn't imitating me anymore. It was me. Every breath, every pause, every nervous laugh. Every word I had spoken since starting my first night shift. It had recorded everything. The monitors suddenly switched to a live broadcast screen. A red timer counted upward. Live. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. The broadcast had already started. But I hadn't said a single word. My recorded voice calmly spoke through every radio in the building. My name is Ryan Walker. I work the night shift at Black Creek Meat Processing Plant. I found something inside Freezer 12. No, I whispered. The recording continued by itself. Every sentence I had spoken over the last 10 nights had been perfectly stitched together into a new conversation. The signal wasn't copying people anymore. It was creating them. The factory suddenly began shaking harder than ever before. Outside, every creature fell to its knees. Not because they were attacked, because they were listening. The enormous thing climbing the radio tower finally reached the top. The tower bent almost in half under its weight. Then, it simply stopped moving, watching, waiting. The live timer reached 1 minute. The voice inside the speakers calmly finished its final sentence. If anyone is hearing this, please come help me. The transmission ended. Complete silence. Then, hundreds of phones began ringing. Every office phone, every emergency phone, every mobile phone left inside employee lockers. Even my own phone. The screen lit up. 1,842 missed calls. More calls appeared every second. People were hearing the broadcast. People believed someone was trapped inside the factory. Headlights appeared in the distance. Police cars, ambulances, civilian vehicles. They were all driving toward Black Creek. The supervisor's truck was the first to arrive. He stepped out, looked toward the factory, and immediately stopped walking. His face turned white. He slowly removed his hat. Then, without saying a word, he got back into his truck, turned around, and drove away. Every other vehicle did exactly the same. None of them entered the property. None of them even looked at the building twice, as if they had suddenly forgotten why they came. The lights disappeared into the distance, one by one, leaving the factory alone again. My phone buzzed one last time. A single text message. Unknown number. It contained only one sentence. Thank you for keeping the signal alive. The lights inside the factory suddenly returned to normal. The alarm stopped. The cameras switched off. Outside, the creatures were gone. The radio tower stood perfectly straight, as if nothing had ever happened. I quit that morning. I never went back. 6 months later, Black Creek Meat Processing Plant officially closed forever. The newspapers said the business went bankrupt. The building was demolished. The radio tower was torn down. Today, nothing remains except an empty field. But every year, on November 18th, exactly 3:13 a.m., drivers passing that road report hearing a weak radio signal through their car speakers. No matter what station they're listening to, the transmission always begins the same way. My name is Ryan Walker, and if you're hearing this, don't open Freezer 12.